Hello, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our event. We're going to get started. If I can invite people to come in from outside and please take a seat. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Bienvenidos, gracias por venir en el último día de la conferencia. This is an important topic and we appreciate you all being here. My name is Jen Austin. I'm the strategy director for the Climate Champions team, and it is my honor today to be here to moderate and organize this session. Today we're focused on highlighting the opportunities specifically to advance finance. We know throughout the week we've heard about a lot of ideas and innovations and initiatives and leadership, especially from the region, to tackle the climate challenge. We all know that without financing, none of that will be possible. So a really important discussion. The priorities that we're going to look at today are priorities for scaling up finance, especially in emerging markets and developing economies, looking at how some existing leaders in the region are already taking action and learning a bit from their practical experience, looking at how the finance sector can work together and how they're doing that already through the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, and ultimately talking a bit about what more needs to happen to continue to mobilize finance at the pace and scale required. So we're going to start off with a keynote speech by Dr. Mahmoud Mohiuddin, who is the UN Climate Action Champion for COP27. We're going to follow that with two fireside chats, one focused on net zero strategies and one focused on mobilizing resources. We probably won't have much time for Q&A as we're starting late and already have a packed program, so I'll do my best to keep us on time. And without further ado, introduce Dr. Mahmoud Mohiuddin for a keynote speech.
Right, good morning. Thank you so much, Jen, for the kind introduction. I'm very happy and pleased to have the opportunity to participate in this important event discussing the priorities of climate finance in Latin America and the Caribbean. I attended very important and useful events and discussions and good engagements bilaterally and in groups. And the issues related to finance, investment, debt came across very strongly in all of the discussions, regardless the topic. And this is the beauty of finance, and this is why finance matters. Problems of finance in the context of climate, that in the past it was not necessarily linked to a bottom-up approach to what we require. In discussions with those who have been behind the famous $100 billion figure of Copenhagen in 2009, it seemed that it was a good, nice figure to start from as a critical minimum of what should be delivered from the advanced economies to the developing ones and to the emerging markets as well. We know that since 2009 until last year, we never reached the 100 billion in full. At best, we have a figure close to 80% as reported and shared last year. However, the estimates of the cost of managing the transition, achieving the net zero targets, keeping the 1.5 degrees alive, and putting aside the requirements for adaptation and resilience, the average of costs is around 2 trillion to 2.2 trillion. So even if we assume that the $100 billion is going to be fully delivered one day, multiply that by a factor of 10, that will not be sufficient to fill half of the gap of what's required. But we still consider the $100 billion delivery is important for credibility, for confidence building, for a token of trust. If we cannot really find the 100 billion of the past, we'll not really be able to trust any kind of promise of finance post-2025. In addition to that, we shouldn't be forgetting that the $100 billion are contributing to funding the least developed countries, the low-income countries, small states and small islands, and the 100 billion as well, part of that at least, could be utilized effectively, in a good day, by the multilateral development banks and others to leverage finance, to de-risk, and to use them in financial support, including first loss, as being articulated by many of the development financing institutions, including the World Bank, the EBRD, and the Inter-American Development Bank. The two presidencies of COP26 and COP27 had asked Vera Songwe, the very well-known economist from Africa and the executive secretary of the Regional Economic Commission of Africa, and the very renowned and very well-respected economist, Nick Stern, who was behind, actually, the articulation of the $100 billion in the past, to lead a commission of experts from around the world to identify the priorities for post-2025. And the starting point will be what we did right and what we did wrong in finance during the last 10 years. But beyond the 100 billion and what will happen in post-2025, there is a requirement for the private sector to do more, assuming, of course, that the state is doing its function through domestic resource mobilization. And one of the main achievements of Glasgow is to have this alliance of private sector, financial institutions, asset managers, asset owners, to commit assets of $130 trillion, earmarking them to the net zero targets. This is a very big initiative. It has prerequisites, and the prerequisites could be expected to be around having in the country, to benefit from that kind of commitment, good governance system, rule of law, pipeline of projects, priorities of projects identified, good exit mechanisms, and deep financial market. In many discussions with Mark Carney, one of the architects of this, actually the leading architect of this work, along with Bloomberg, and of course the champions, Nigel Topping was involved, and many others. We were just discussing that the perfect shouldn't be an enemy of the good, because the list of prerequisites are really there to be applied by very sophisticated economies and societies. And there is some good discussion about that. But the starting point is in our hands, if we can manage to have a good pipeline of projects. And this idea was behind an initiative that was started for the first time with 5 roundtables in the 5 regional economic commissions of the UN system, try to have a kind of matchmaking between the promise of finance from the private sector and the demand that is coming from the line ministries at the national level. And actually, the first roundtable is going to be in Africa, in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, in the first week of next month. And then there will be other events, including one for Latin America and the Caribbean that's going to be held in Chile. The third element after public finance, generosity is expected, and the private sector promise is basically what form of finance we are requiring. In a world that is full of challenges, even before the Ukraine crisis, even before COVID-19, the World Bank and the IDB and others were warning us of problems related to accumulation of debt, of what's so-called the fourth wave of debt. And we know that the previous three waves of debt, each one of them ended with a crisis. The first one was here in Latin America and the Caribbean, back in the 1970s and 80s. The second one was in the emerging markets crisis in the 1990s. The third was in the global financial crisis. The fourth, that we hope is not going to be ending with debt, is what we are at today, this fourth wave. So as much as we can, we need to have the finance relying more on private sector participation, on investments, on grants, not on debt. The fourth point is related to debt again through debt reduction mechanisms. We are grateful to the innovation of countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. In the past, in the 1980s, through the swap mechanisms created in Costa Rica, and then more recently, and ideas that were embraced by islands, including Belize, and then moved on beyond this region, on swaps, debt swaps, reductions of debt, and investing the proceeds through a complex mechanism into opportunities in nature and on climate. And this, I think, will be one of the big priorities for COP26, for COP27, and we are expecting more ideas, not just relating swaps to projects, but relating swaps to KPIs. The fifth point is the creation of carbon markets. The most sophisticated carbon markets in the world today are in Europe. But we need to have tailored carbon markets for the emerging markets and developing economies, including for Latin America and the Caribbean. Here, it is not just about the finance, it's about knowledge, the foundations of infrastructure of markets, the standard, the codes, the regulations, and a great deal of knowledge sharing is required. And that will be another big subject of discussion for COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh. The final point, people are talking about financial innovation and borrowing from the African corporation, the AFC, the African Finance Corporation, talking about finnovation, this finance and innovation together. But you cannot do financial innovation having all of these colorful bonds, including many of the bonds that we see in Latin America and the Caribbean, green bonds, blue bonds, and some of them are in local currencies. But we cannot really have them without standards. And when people are investing in ESG classes today, are very much concerned, and legitimately so, if what they are investing in is fully compatible with the standards. And we are very grateful to the Secretary General of the UN for the formation of a committee led by the former Minister of Environment and Climate of Canada to get us onto track and understanding on what worked and what didn't. And we are expecting from her a report. Hopefully she can share some of the outcomes of this report by the time of COP27 in November. I said this is the final point, and I got the warning from here, 30 seconds left, and a nice smile from Jen as well that beyond my time. Any effort on finance, be it from the private sector or the external sector, will not work unless the budget of the state is not translating the priorities of the society. And so far, and we hope and challenge at the same time, that countries of the Caribbean and countries of Latin America can lead the way of showing us a budget which is based on sustainability and climate priorities and climate action, because without the budget and the budget design, the signals to the private sector, be it domestic or external, the signals to the international community will be very much confused. And we need the budget to tell us what are the priorities, especially that the impact of climate on our infrastructure and society and the requirements for resilience and adaptation will be more dependent on public finance. So it will be great if countries of Latin America and the Caribbean start to work together with the international development finance institutions in order to have the first application of a budget that translates the sustainability as a priority of the society adequately. Having said that, I look forward to the discussion. I look forward to the messages and outcomes of this session and the rest of the conference, and what we can really bring to Sharm el-Sheikh. And all of you, without exception, are all welcomed in Sharm el-Sheikh in November. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mahmoud. And without further ado, I'll welcome all the panelists for the first panel to please come forward. And it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for this panel, the Vice Minister of International Cooperation for the Dominican Republic, Milagros Maria de Camp. You can all come forward. She'll introduce the panelists. Please sit anywhere here. We have probably 25 minutes for this panel, and we'll save 25 minutes for the next. Sí, en español. This panel is going to be in Spanish. And if anyone needs translation, there are devices at the back. Gracias.
Hola, muy buenos días. Muchas gracias por la introducción. Un saludo a todos los invitados especiales que se encuentran aquí presentes el día de hoy. Para mí es un honor tenerlos esta mañana en la República Dominicana en el marco de la Semana Regional del Clima para Latinoamérica y el Caribe. Y tenemos aquí en el escenario a la señora Jessica López, presidente del Banco Estado de Chile, a la señora Jenny Maher, jefa del Departamento de Cambio Climático del Ministerio de Medio Ambiente de Chile, y al señor Graham Watkins, Chief of Climate Change Division del Banco Interamericano de Desarrollo. Es un placer tenerlos aquí, bienvenidos. Y bueno, el marco de la discusión, como bien fue introducido por el señor Mahmoud, es precisamente para hablar sobre el avance en la movilización de fondos para la implementación de las contribuciones nacionalmente determinadas en la región latinoamericana y del Caribe. Las contribuciones nacionalmente determinadas, tal como están en la mesa en el día de hoy, no nos llevan a cumplir con la meta de estar dentro de los 1.5 grados centígrados de temperatura media global, lo que es una situación trágica para pequeños estados insulares en desarrollo, como lo es la República Dominicana, y para la mayoría de los otros países, efectos económicos, impactos económicos muy por arriba de nuestras capacidades adaptativas. Estamos trabajando, todos los países de la región, en tratar de avanzar la acción climática. Sin embargo, la movilización del financiamiento no ha sido lo eficiente ni lo efectiva que se requiere para la urgencia de la crisis. Estamos trabajando, por ejemplo, en esta región, que no es la región que es mayormente responsable de las emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero, simplemente representa un 8%, para el caso de República Dominicana un 0.06% de las emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero. Necesitamos entonces también unificarnos como región y presionar a los grandes emisores para que cumplan con sus compromisos, para que cumplan con las metas que han hecho en el marco del Acuerdo de París, pero también para que aumenten su ambición, para que podamos llegar precisamente a esa meta de mantener la temperatura en menos de 2 grados Celsius y ojalá que en 1.5 grados Celsius, porque tal cual están las NDCs, y si mantenemos el status quo, nos vemos que vamos a llegar a un 2.7 grados centígrados y posiblemente superior a los 3 grados. Entonces nosotros quisiéramos comenzar la conversación haciéndole una pregunta a Jenny. Queremos conocer cuál es el estado de Chile con la implementación de la contribución nacionalmente determinada y cómo se ha avanzado para acelerar el cumplimiento del Acuerdo de París.
Muchas gracias, gracias por la invitación. Es difícil cuando empezamos a pensar sobre que tenemos tan poco tiempo para poder cumplir las metas que nos impone o que nos dice el Acuerdo de París. El Acuerdo de París tenemos un compromiso que es no pasar el 1.5 al 2100, sin embargo ese compromiso vemos que lo más probable es que lo sobrepasemos antes del 2030, así de mal estamos. Los informes del IPCC han sido súper gráficos y súper claros al respecto. En el caso de Chile, el haber sido presidencia de la COP25 impulsó bastante la política climática nacional, tanto así que pudimos comprometernos con una meta de carbono neutralidad a más tardar al 2050, que es básicamente enfocarnos en la ciencia, en los objetivos que nos estaba planteando la ciencia. Nosotros en el 2015 teníamos una NDC, que era una NDC que fue bastante criticada, la primera que presentamos, porque era poco transparente, tenía falta de claridad de cómo se iba a cumplir, era contra un BAU, era bien compleja. En el 2020 presentamos una NDC actualizada, aprovechando todo el ímpetu que había sobre el uso de la ciencia, y presentamos una NDC que está basada en 3 temas científicos que fueron y aparecieron en los informes del IPCC. Primero, nos comprometimos con un pic de emisiones porque sabíamos que debíamos cambiar la trayectoria de nuestras emisiones. En vez de seguir creciendo, teníamos que llegar a un punto en que teníamos que bajar las emisiones. Así que nos comprometimos que a más tardar al 2025 teníamos que hacer ese quiebre en la trayectoria de nuestras emisiones. Nos comprometimos con una meta, con un número en el 2030, que es una meta que es muy fácil, es muy transparente y es muy fácil de medir y es muy fácil de demostrar, que es tener una cantidad de toneladas en el 2030. Pero lo más importante fue que nosotros incluimos una meta que está directamente basada en la ciencia. El aumento de temperatura se mide, o la correlación que se puede hacer es a través de las emisiones con el llamado presupuesto global de carbono. Por lo tanto, este presupuesto global nosotros lo transformamos a un presupuesto nacional. Y eso nos ha permitido diseñar políticas o diseñar una estrategia que nos permita no desviarnos de las trayectorias para poder llegar a cumplir ese presupuesto de carbono, que es una meta acumulada. Independiente de la trayectoria que tengamos, no nos podemos pasar de una cantidad de emisiones acumuladas. Es lo más transparente, lo más fácil de cumplir y es lo más flexible para poder diseñar políticas. A través de eso nosotros hicimos nuestra política más importante, que es la estrategia climática de largo plazo, donde tenemos una visión país de cómo llegar al año 2050, donde todos los sectores pusieron ahí esa visión en el corto, mediano y largo plazo de cómo querían ser al 2050 en línea con la neutralidad. Y en este momento, hace 3 semanas atrás, fue publicada la Ley Marco de Cambio Climático, que es el mayor avance, diría yo, porque institucionaliza el trabajo que venimos haciendo en cambio climático, lo institucionaliza ya que da roles y responsabilidades claras a todos los sectores y además formaliza metas que son derivadas de nuestra NDC, las asigna a los distintos sectores o a los distintos ministerios con competencia. Por lo tanto, obliga de alguna forma a que tengamos planes y que en los próximos 2 años tengamos planes de implementación que van a ser concretos, con plazos y con metas súper claras de cómo tenemos que cumplir y llegar a nuestra NDC.
Muchísimas gracias, Jenny. Y mencionas algo muy interesante porque, de hecho, nuestros países que aún están en vía de desarrollo tenemos el derecho de continuar nuestro desarrollo, pero el mayor reto es desasociar ese desarrollo económico de la degradación ambiental. Y queremos conocer un poquito de Jessica, qué acciones y mecanismos desarrolla el banco para aportar en la implementación de las contribuciones nacionalmente determinadas y las estrategias a largo plazo.
Bueno, lo que voy a hacer es contar un poquitito lo que ha sido la historia del Banco Estado en este proceso. Además me conviene porque partimos el año 2016 con este camino, cuando yo era gerente general del banco. Entonces me puedo adjudicar algunos logros, como decían. Iniciamos este proceso efectivamente el año 2016 a través de las cosas tradicionales, formales, de creación de un área, de definición de algunas políticas esenciales. Iniciamos el camino de medir nuestra huella de carbono operacional, que es la que resulta del funcionamiento, digamos, de la institución, del banco y de sus 10 empresas filiales. Tenemos 10 empresas filiales, nos incorporamos también a la medición del Dow Jones Sustainability Index, que lo seguimos manteniendo hasta ahora, y dimos nuestros primeros pasos en lo que llamamos los productos verdes. Emitimos un bono social, emitimos un bono mujer en Japón, y generamos varios productos verdes, uno con una
products,
línea
one with a KFEWE of house that had a bit of a higher standard as far as science, energy science, and that allow for a lower interest rate. Other work with the Ministry of Energy concerning energy efficiency. In the end, we created a set of things and also starting to measure the risk of our portfolio. On that road, it's quite interesting what I'm going to tell you now. When one measures a particular bank's footprint, that would be our case, therefore 5% is determined by the bank's operation with the internal operation, given the energy consumption, given the transportation of the workers to their home, waste, materials, and 0.5 and 99.5 of the emissions are determined by our loan and investment portfolio. So that puts us in a world that we've started where we have very entertaining things. We have our majority portfolio, which is that for the large corporations, and 70% evaluated in terms of environmental and social risk. And we also evaluate the projects that are arriving, the larger projects. We have more than 200 projects assessed where we're asking for the environmental assessment report issued by the competent authorities. And there are things there that are demanded, others that are committed, others that are rejected. In the end, the year 2021, we incorporated to the Race to Zero, to the Bank Alliance for net zero. Thus, we're also committed to net zero emissions to 2050. As a country, of course, we need to honor that commitment, and by 2030, with net zero emissions in operational senses. It's not easy. Am I way out of time? Thank you very much. And precisely that coherent assurances to achieve the goals is extremely important. I want to ask Graham a question. To know the roles of the Development Bank in the acceleration of the NDC in Latin America, what mechanisms have we to help the stakeholders to implement? I'll try to do it in 3 minutes. It's lots of information. I'm coming out of 2 conversations this morning with the Brits and the Americans, how we can lean so that the countries we access climate financing. And in fact, we don't have projects. Some has projects. Some, if we don't have project financing, we don't have decarbonization. We don't have financing. At the end of the day, that's the bottom line. But I want to emphasize some things. We're not talking about additionality. We're talking about deep changes within all the systems of the country, and this is extremely important. We're talking about redirecting, not new money, but we want to keep this in mind. And there, the banks are trying to provide support the country so they can change their plan, change their central and sector policies. We are using our projects. Look, how much money will we contribute? $6 billion every year. It sounds like a lot, but it's nothing. You need 470 billion up to maybe 1.3 trillion. So that you see, it's like a drop in the bucket. It's not going to work, and we need to provide support with TA and concessional funds when necessary, and so to move the gauge up until we want to. I wanted to speak a little bit on something that was emphasized at the end of the ambassador's presentation. Those that need to start are the countries themselves. And yesterday, together with the Dominican Republic, we said that we are starting this process. We need to have a budget to where the expenses are being allocated, and with this analysis, start to say, well, there we can put more public money, but we all need to do this. And in fact, we've conducted an analysis that shows that 1 up to 3% is positive, but here we have the numbers. I think it's 2 up to 7% is negative. So, well, we don't have the balance yet in Latin America, so we need to move this one. Also, yesterday, we launched a book on what are the changes that we can have at this level of each sector. We started with decarbonization, but we are already offering others. There are like cliff notes. What can be done with adaptation, obviously, is key for the future. And finally, we need transparent fiscal management. I only have 3 seconds left. And we need green financial system. There's all this for the green bonds that the ambassador spoke of. These are key. We're trying to support. We have a green bonds platform. We have like 73% of the bonds, but the idea is a bit to standardize and make the whole process transparent. Our operation can provide support, move forward, see how we can allow something. Leadership in countries is key, and it's not because I am sitting with Chile here, but Chile is a leader not only for Latin America, but in all the world. Costa Rica also is heading the way. Colombia is moving. Several countries, and this is what's happening in other countries, they're saying, oh, all right, this is interesting. The Dominican Republic themselves, they're starting to move all these changes that I'm discussing with policy. We are moving it. So there are countries. Let's see. Number one, we have the commitment. Then we have to see if we actually can, but it's not necessary to have a long-term or a way to think in long-term transparently. Remember, but this can set the foundation after we can define the project. But the projects are the same sectors. The energy, I think 2 days ago we spoke and talked about the example from the northern Dominican Republic. They're moving. They already have the commitment, but now we have to support them.
Pero mira, lo que estoy viendo es que el reto es enorme, pero lo que estoy viendo también es que hay países que son súper positivos. Vamos bien, pero tenemos que ir más rápido.
Muchísimas gracias. Sí, precisamente esa creación de nuevos instrumentos financieros innovadores que nos puedan habilitar nuevas fuentes de financiamiento, pero que también nos ayuden a movilizar financiamiento ya existente y redirigir ese financiamiento a inversiones más limpias que nos ayuden a financiar esa transición que necesitamos para alcanzar nuestras metas. Y ahora quisiéramos hablar otra vez con Jenny para conocer cómo ha visto la participación del sector privado en la implementación de la estrategia de largo plazo de cambio climático.
Muchas gracias. Bueno, con el sector privado hay una historia que hemos venido trazando a través de cómo Chile también ha evolucionado en temas de políticas de cambio climático. Lo principal que nosotros hemos visto para involucrar al sector privado fue tener metas claras y estrategias claras. Siempre, bueno, hablando de hace 10 años atrás o 15 años atrás, nosotros nos encontrábamos con que el sector privado decía, bueno, nosotros queremos hacer cosas, pero díganos ustedes hacia dónde vamos como país. Si no nos dicen eso, nosotros podemos tomar ciertas iniciativas, pero no sabemos si van a estar o no alineadas con lo que ustedes quieren hacer como país. Por lo tanto, desde que Chile realmente ha tomado un cierto liderazgo en sus compromisos y ha sacado políticas como la estrategia, la NDC y la ley marco de cambio climático, el sector privado se ha visto mucho más involucrado con nosotros. Los procesos que en los que nosotros hemos elaborado también estas políticas han sido participativos. Hemos cambiado un poco la forma de hacer política pública, porque muchas veces la política pública se diseña con técnicos o con el sector público y después se pasa por un proceso de consulta pública que es más que nada informativo. Sin embargo, desde hace unos años en Chile ha cambiado un poco esto y hemos incluido otras etapas en la consulta pública. La consulta pública ahora es un proceso participativo que parte con una participación temprana, donde se hace como un escáner o un screen de cómo está la opinión de los públicos, de los privados, de la ONG, de la sociedad civil en general, y vemos un poco en qué nivel estamos, hacemos un poco un diagnóstico. Después elaboramos los documentos de la política a través de también talleres donde nos reunimos con expertos, con la academia, etcétera, y después pasamos por la consulta pública. Entonces, toda la política ahora se hace de una forma participativa y eso ha permitido que el sector privado se involucre de otra forma. ¿Por qué? Porque a la hora de hacer sus propias estrategias saben la forma en que el gobierno o hacia dónde va el gobierno. Por lo tanto, es mucho más fácil para ellos ver y alinear sus acciones con las cosas que el gobierno está haciendo también. La estrategia de largo plazo, en este caso, que es una de nuestras principales políticas, tiene la visión de los distintos sectores de la economía, hacia dónde quieren llegar. Por lo tanto, el sector privado en esos distintos sectores puede encontrar objetivos en el mediano, corto y largo plazo, no solamente cuantitativos, sino que también cualitativos, que les permiten también una ayuda para el diseño de sus propias estrategias.
Besides the placing information on climatic risks, it also helped a lot to guide the private sector in investments and to think how to develop itself. We have a system that's called the Climate Credit Atlas, which it's been launched, and we want to enhance it in time. That shows the risk. It shows a risk map across the country and allows for decision making not only for the public sector but also private, because it expresses what are the different risks according to. Thank you very much, because here I will provide an example of South-South Cooperation, specifically the Dominican Republic, learning from Chile's experience. It's trying to emulate this. It's setting the basis and the mechanism for the participating parts of the framework climate change law that we're going to be having in the Dominican. We have cooperation with Chile's government and the ICLAC, and we're trying to implement a similar mechanism or a similar product to risk, to the climate risk atlas. Or here we see example where good practices in some countries in the region transfer to implement best practices in other countries. And we want to speak with Jessica about the State Bank, which is a member of the Glasgow Net to Zero Alliance. What actions have the bank taken to increase its carbon zero goals, and how is it aligning with the NDCs? This commitment was signed in September of last year. Thus, we are relatively new in this working group, but I'm thankful here because it helped me to look at the story. And I see, and I have the convictions that we've done a good job. So we moved significantly, but the task is much larger. But we have a part of the bank that's convinced us the road we need to take. Maybe we're not clear on everything. There's much to learn. We need to take a look at other experiences from other parts of the world. But we are decided to move forward. And this happens because, well, we are in a country that has a regulatory structure that makes it easier for us not to like some laws, but it's there. And that, let's say, scrapes the floor, if you will. We are a state bank, and we're state-owned. We are the largest and most important bank in Chile, and we feel we have a unique opportunity to go down this road, and this is done through standards, through cultural changes, and I can tell a couple of things that are quite smart. They said like the credit committees, when we have large operations, sometimes it's only enough to ask, this customer, have you ever asked what is this customer's climate change strategy? Oh, yes. I mean, because this is a topic that's not really discussed. So in this area, you do assess that from the financial, social, environmental standpoint. But another thing is having to go to the customer and tell the customer, look, what is your strategy for climate change? Or when an executive comes and proposes or asks us to authorize the purchase of, I don't know, 100 support equipment for one of our 500 offices. So I would ask, how does this work? Oh, with petroleum, and the equipment lasts 15 years. Well, I mean, well, it's all the same. This can't be done. We need the office need to continue to work in case there's power outage. No, let's look elsewhere. I don't know how it's done, but this. So this is like I had to live this definition that says when the levels are greater or when the authorities are committed, we can move the needle. We can feel that the needle actually moves. So that area with this logistic area of the bank is gonna have to reflect and see how we move forward, because something seems to be changing. And Graham would like to know from your perspective and experience what is necessary to unblock the implementation of NDCs in the region, or and who should join the discussion. What do you feel is missing? Well, in fact, we're talking with NDC partner about this the other day, and we had a discussion that's still a bit ongoing as to how we can work in a more effective way to move the NDC agenda. From our perspective, our main partner in the country is the Ministry of Finance. If we are not involving the Ministry of Finance, then I think there's little probability for us to move forward if the Ministry of Environment is going to be this, or in the climate change office. But I would like to emphasize that what I'm saying is that, one, we help for the ministries of the environment to, you need to try coming to talk with finance. Number two, if we're talking about changes in transportation, then you need to have the transportation sector. You can't do changes from the outside to the system, and you need to also be talking with the private sector. But there are many others that have a shared interest, so participation of everyone here is key. If we don't do it from the onset, you don't engage all the stakeholders, there will be more resistance, and with this resistance, you're not going to advance or comply with anything. So that's lesson number one. The Ministry of Finance, sector ministry that are key to move forward, civil society, private sector that also has to be at the table, at the academia, because they're also important for established model and have the capability of doing this model in the country, being it from Japan or the United States. No, this has to be number one. Once you have this, which is not easy, think that you need to start by identifying the barriers. What are the things that prevent you from doing these kinds of investment? Once you have these barriers identified and set, then you can look at the solution. But now, the solutions may be impossible, but if we can do some of these processes, and hence the importance of technical assistance that we need to have to move the agendas forward. And I don't want to overemphasize it, but the engagement of the stakeholders is not stopped. It's not that it's only at the end, because it is an interactive process. It is one that you're going to try to do this and that doesn't work. Okay, then let's do this one. So you need to have like a table that follows our process to engage the stakeholder the whole time in the whole process. And I think these are the lenses that we learn. Again, there are models that are quite interesting, and within This one you want to need to think in the political economy of changes. So we need to work with them across all stories of change. And there's a lot of stories of change in the world. Always the successful one have worked with the loser. So if we think that we can do this change and, well, it doesn't matter what happens, then it's not going to work, because it's these that are going to cause the problems. There's the resistance, and it's going to get problems that are just not going to let you move forward. So I'll leave it at that. The timekeeper is telling me that I need to stop. No. Thank you very much, Graham. In fact, what you mentioned is quite important, because what I've heard from the country's experiences, one of the most important challenges is precisely to achieve that coordination among different authorities and have the environmental authorities approach other entities to be able to make climate change cross-cutting across the whole state, and that will translate into actions. I'd like to thank all the participants today, and truly, I mean, we could stay here all day talking, but to thank our panel members, especially all of you, to have a happy rest of the day and enjoy the rest of Climate Change Week.
What some of the specifics are that you all are doing already to move forward on this problem and to help share some of those experiences. So we'll ask similarly for you guys to keep your responses to about 2 or 3 minutes. So we'll see if we have some time for a bit of follow-up conversation, but really excited to hear your insights from today. We'll start with Fabio from Itaú Bank. And first of all, we've been talking a bit about our campaigns and the Net Zero Alliances and GFANZ, the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. Your bank is a part of one of those campaigns. So we'd like to ask you actually just to tell the audience a bit about what is the Net Zero Banking Alliance and the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, and then what motivated you all to join, what is it that you're doing, and how is that helping you move forward?
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. It's a pleasure to be here talking so important things, relevant things for our economy. Well, the Net Zero Banking Alliance is an alliance for banking industry that allows the discussion and promoted how banks can, toward a net zero economy, direct their business. And the GFANZ is another alliance that have a space in the COP26 that are promoting many important tools and frameworks to help to support the financial industry in general, not only bank, but insurances and investors, to go through the net zero economy. Something that is important to highlight is that we have no space to delay or to postpone this strategy to become a net zero economy. All the studies from IPCC and scientific side shows that is the time for us to move our business and our society for this dimension, or we won't have business space in 2030, 2050. So based on these tools and the exchange of ideas and experience that NZBA and GFANZ promote for us, it will set a plan to become a net zero bank in 2050, but to reduce 50% of our portfolio emissions in 2030. It means that we are working together with our clients to allow them to do the transition for a net zero economy. And we are doing it providing advisory, providing services and products, and to help the development of innovation technology. We just launched in Brazil ESG Hub, focus on startups, presenting then challenges that our clients for corporate side set to us at the main challenges to achieve a net zero economy. We as a bank have challenges too to solve, as for example, the use of air conditioning. We are here in a very hot temperature, and without air conditioning it's not possible to be here. But how to decrease the emissions from the air conditioner, for example, is a challenge for our operations. When we look for the portfolio of the bank, how to help our clients from different sectors like oil and gas, mining, steel, to become a net zero or to reduce the emission. As a society, we can't work or we can't live without these industries, these sectors, so it's important to help them to do the transition for net zero.
Great, thank you so much. Next, we're going to ask Luis. We see more and more of the private sector actors stepping up as part of these net zero alliances, as part of the GFANZ alliance in which they cooperate together. We still know that it's a real challenge for the private sector to move ahead and make some of these investments. There's an important role for groups like IDB Invest. And so could you talk about what it is that you're doing in particular to accelerate and crowd in private finance to help overcome some of those challenges? And are there any key sectors and topics that you're working on?
Thank you. Very happy to join this panel. And well, IDB Invest, we work with the private sector along Latin America and the Caribbean. And in order to crowd in and accelerate the finance in Latin America, what we do is to help mobilize funds. And so we finance directly corporates, projects in infrastructure and renewable energy. We also finance the private financial institutions, but in addition to that, we help mobilize funds from the global private sector, investors, institutional investors, European banks, North American banks, and we help bridge funds to the region. And so when we do that, we help project developers, we help banks develop green finance products, green finance different kind of projects like resilient infrastructure, renewable energy projects, and we also help local banks, private banks, develop green finance lines for different sectors like transport, like, for example, renewable energies, or SMEs, green value chains, et cetera, and then we help fund that with our own resources, but also mobilizing funds. In addition to that, something we have been doing a lot the last years is to help develop the whole market for green and climate funds. As my colleague Graham said in the previous panel, we developed the transparency platform for green bonds, and we help the private sector develop and design 28 green bonds along the region and in different ways. And so this is funding that we are trying to scale up, and this is a mechanism for us to help the whole region mobilize more funds to the private sector, and not only depending on what we can do with our own balance, but also how to reach global investors and help the region to project a positive image, globally speaking, in being a specialized region, a committed region, a private sector committed in Latin America to fund green finance and climate finance at scale.
Great, thank you so much. Definitely important as to really help on that project preparation side to then be able to bring in that private finance. It feels like there's more and more focus on that, and certainly very needed. You also started to mention regionalization and localization. It's part of why we have these regional climate weeks, to make sure we're really talking about specific issues and making sure that solutions are informed on the ground. And so I'll turn next to David. who is with the RMI Islands Energy Program, and want to just ask a little bit about the work that you're doing. We talk about small island developing states. Sometimes we call those big ocean states, or sometimes they call themselves big ocean states, really looking at the unique needs and potential of those states. Can you talk a little bit about the Caribbean Climate Smart Fund that you're working on and how you're using that to address some of the unique challenges and opportunities to mobilize finance here?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Happy to be here. Talk a little bit about RMI before I delve into the Climate Smart Fund that we've developed and launched. RMI has been working in the region and the islands for a little under 10 years, working through de-risking a number of projects and initiatives, and much in a collaborative effort, as described earlier, to basically bring projects through the entire pipeline and make them bankable. And after doing much of that effort, we get to what we thought was the end of the process, and then you have to now find financing, and it's very difficult in small island states, big ocean states, because we don't have the scale to demand that and attract that investment from the private sector or from many of the developmental institutions in general. So, being as it may, we have been working over the last year or so to develop this Climate Smart Fund, the Caribbean Climate Smart Fund, that essentially will help us attract investment for a number of projects that have been already de-risked and are readily available for investment. And these projects span a number of countries, and and it's growing day by day because there's a strong interest in these islands pursuing renewable energy in particular because of the high price of energy and the vulnerability that they have, both from a standpoint of climate and hurricanes. They want to make their grids more resilient, an energy system more resilient, and there are many ways to do so. And in addition to making it more resilient, the cost of energy right now in several of the islands exceeds 60 cents per kilowatt hour. That's 4 times the average rate in the US. So we need to do something about it because it's killing our island economies. And this is what we think is the solution, because it brings a financing mechanism to get these projects over the finish line. The Caribbean Climate Smart Fund essentially will attract investments in 2 parts. You have the investment fund itself, which is going to be consist of debt and equity and grant funding and developmental finance. And you also have the project development facility, similar to the discussion from IDB earlier, where we continue to build the pipeline and bring more projects to the table and make them bankable so that we can have a successful transition in the region.
Great, thank you so much. So next we're going to turn to Rebecca, and from CDP, the Climate Disclosure Project, the lead here in Latin America. And we know that in order to do all of this, we've talked a bit about why and how it's important to bring the finance sector together to cooperate and collaborate on these issues. There's some similar challenges faced across the sector. Some of that has to do just with tracking and data and having information to inform investments and actions across the board. So can you, from CDP, since this is the core of what you do, tell us a little bit about why disclosure of information is so important, what some of those key pieces of information are, and talk about maybe some of the trends in the region you're seeing in terms of voluntary disclosure and even any moves towards regulatory disclosure.
Of course, thank you. So we actually believe the journey starts with disclosure, so that's why CDP works with disclosure to promote transparency. And then from there, we go to insight. And lastly, with all these insights, we'll be able to inform action and concrete action in the environmental area. And some of the trends we have been observing in the financial sector with financial institutions is actually a growth of 40% in the number of financial institutions that are actively engaging with the stakeholders and the companies to promote transparency. And all this engagement has led to 60% growth in the last year of financial institutions that report their climate data themselves, which is huge. But also, we have seen a growth on engagement, not only on climate, but cost-cutting issues. So, for instance, 50% growth on companies disclosing on water risk to financial institutions, 30% growth on forests, but also directly engagement science-based targets. So according to the last campaign, financial institutions that actively engage with the companies were able to promote that 150 new companies to commit to science-based targets. And this may not seem a lot, but it's their emissions are the size of Germany. So a lot of action can be done through the directly engagement financial institutions that we have been seeing. In terms of trends, another trend that we have been seeing is the need for regulation and mandatory disclosure. In this sense, CDP has launched 10 recommendations to regulators and policymakers in terms of what needs to be done so we can promote that financial institutions actively have actions on the ground. And all these recommendations goes from, of course, mandatory disclosure, but how we align taxonomy across the globe, governance, how we promote clear metrics to all financial institutions that are aligned, and how we measure and manage not only risks and opportunities, but effectively the impacts on the ground. And according with the latest data on financial institutions, we see that financial institutions that have joined the GFANZ, they are a lot more likely to engage with climate and science-based targets with the client. When we think about the banking sector, they are 3 times more likely to engage with their clients on science-based targets. When we think about the insurance, they are 4 times more likely to do so, which is a lot. And we have been seeing this increased engagement on of our financial institutions, but when we look at their data, it's still there a lot to be done. So for instance, 65% of financial institutions don't report credit risk, 74% don't report any market risk. And even with a lot of risk yet to be reported, they already represent $1 trillion on impact. So it's a lot. And yet, only 25% of financial institutions report their emissions on their portfolio. So there's a lot to be done. However, the bright side is 50% of financial institutions that have reported to CDP have already committed to be net zero in any net zero commitment, which is great. So this is the journey, you know, it started with commitments and then how we move from commitments to concrete actions on the ground.
Great, thank you so much. And you mentioned the Science-Based Targets Initiative, so a perfect segue. We know that seeing this voluntary action is really important and that we've seen a lot of it and that it's growing, so it's really positive to hear those trends. We have Ligia Ramos from the Science-Based Targets Initiative, and I wonder if you can talk to us a little bit about how the Science-Based Targets Initiative, its framework for financial institutions, is helping to mobilize resources, and what some of the key components are of that target setting approach for financial institutions, knowing that that is a sort of backbone methodology that many of these other actors use to inform their own target setting.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you to the UNFCCC team and the Climate Champions team for the invite. Very happy to be here with such great colleagues. So I'm Ligia from the Science-Based Targets Initiative. We work with companies and financial institutions to support them to set science-based emission reduction targets, so targets that lead us to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees and to reach this state of net zero emissions no longer than 2050. And we started our work in 2015, working with companies in the, let's say, real economy, but we always recognized the relevance of the financial institution to drive this agenda. So in 2020, so it's very new, we launched our framework for financial institutions to align their portfolios, so their investment and lending activities with science, so also setting targets for this Scope 3 emissions. So now financial institutions can have science-based emission reduction targets for their Scope 3 emissions. As of today, we have 172 financial institutions from all around the world committed to the initiative. 25 of them already have approved targets. This can be a process of 2 years for a financial institution and for a company to have a science-based targets. So that's why we have this gap, this difference in the numbers. But thing is that from Latin America, we only have 3 financial institutions committed. So when Banco do Brasil from Brazil, Bancolombia from Colombia, and Grupo Financiero Banorte from Colombia. Oh, sorry, I think, yeah, I think I mixed their names, but only 3 of them. So we really need to fill out this gap, and I count with you, my colleagues here, to support me as well with this task. But those are the short-term targets, so the 5 to 10-year targets. And now we are working on developing a methodology for financial institutions to also be net zero. So we launched in April this year a foundations paper. So a first step in this journey that presents the concept, so what it means for a financial institution to be net zero. And we also have some guiding principles for them. And we are working now in developing the criteria, methods, and tools to allow these financial institutions in a very practical way to be net zero. This will be launched by March next year. We will also have a public consultation process, as we always have when we launch any new methodology. So you are all invited to join. And I have to finish here, but please join us in this journey. We really want to hear from you as well what is needed to support FIs in this journey.
Great, thank you so much. So I want to just close out. We have about 5 minutes left for this panel. I want to give each speaker 1 minute. We didn't exactly tell you who was going to ask this question, but it's only 1 minute, so no doubt you'll all have good insights. I think throughout this whole session, and really part of the purpose of this week, is to bring people together to think about how we can cooperate to overcome these complexities and difficulties. And here on this stage and in the panel before, we saw so many different pieces of the puzzle and people really working on the details. So I have sort of 2 questions for a quick answer. Is one, if you listen to this panel, your colleagues here and before, and think about cooperation, what do you see as some of the most important gaps to close in terms of coordination and cooperation from your perspective to other partners that you're reaching out to? And since we're here on our journey to the COP, what is it would be your quick message to the countries as they come to COP27? What is it that you want the nations to bring to COP27 to help make all of this go faster? So we'll just go down the line. Actually, I might start at the far end and then let you pass the microphone back down if you can. So again, what cooperation do we need and what role can the countries play? What would be your call to them to bring to COP27?
Yeah, thanks, Jen. I think we have a conceptual barrier to overcome here. So we have GFANZ, we have science-based targets, we have other initiatives working in this field. So collaborating with them is key to support these financial institutions to understand the role they play and in which initiative they should be part of. So this is something we have been trying to work together to overcome this barrier. And I think talking from a private sector perspective here that the science-based targets work with, I think countries really need to support companies to have ambitions and science-based targets. So I would love to see them including the science-based perspective in their programs and everything they are developing now.
Well, I think the time for us to be pragmatic is now. So I think we have to recognize in a region like Latin America that there is different approaches that are needed, because like we have countries with big institutions, big public sector, strong public sector, but we also have countries with very weak institutions. And so in there, we normally work a lot more with the private sector that can lead instead of the public sector. And so differentiated approaches are needed per country. That's one pragmatic thing that needs to be said. The second is we work with private sector clients all the days. and they don't really get about the technicalist behind the climate change issues. So we need to land this in a terrain that is well known by them, and so the business language is needed. In there, what we need is to mobilize capital. We need to tell them how to do it. We need to develop financial products. We need to use proactively blended finance in the creation of these new financial products. We have to show successful cases in the capital markets and how that is of benefit for different industries and for key sectors. And of course, pragmatism. We know that last year, 270 billion were lost by catastrophic events. We know 1/3 of that was given by floods. And we already know that only 8% of that was insured. And so someone lost a lot of money. 92% of that was not insured. And so who lost that? And so
Luis, I'm sorry, I have to ask you to wrap because we're getting pushed out of the room. We need to come down the line here.
We have to tell the people how to stop losing money. Resilience is a key thing to push in markets.
Thank you.
Yes, in terms of collaboration, I would say collaboration on metrics and methodologies. As I've said, I think a lot of advances have been made in terms of commitments, which is great. Like, we still have a lot to do, but especially from the financial sector, there's a lot of complexity depending on the subsector and everything related to that. So if we could advance and promote collaboration and exchange best practices between peers and between countries in terms of how to improve and advance all these methodologies for the financial sector, this will be critical. And for countries, I would say that all of them to join the discussion on how to shape a sustainable financial system with very open mind and all different solutions, because it's not one solution for that. We will need blended finance, but also we need some grants. I mean, sometimes grants, yes, they will be needed. And insurance, how can we put all the different financial solutions to the table so we can have an efficient, sustainable financial system that will work for all the climate issues, not only mitigation, but also adaptation.
Thank you.
Well, I agree with my colleague here, and I would also add that not only methodology, but also data, open source, open data that could be used for all the banks, all the private sectors. I believe that this is not a competitive agenda, it's a cooperative agenda, that we have to do it together as a society, and each player of this society has their responsibility. So for us in banks, we have to develop new instruments, focus on innovation, focus on new risk models, and countries have to put in place the NDCs. It's not time to only raise ambition, but to implement the strategies. I believe that this is the window we have of opportunity, and after this decade, we don't have any other opportunity anymore. And looking at Latin America, it's important to highlight the social, the S of ESG is not, we don't have, we can't have any solution for a climate strategy without inclusion, especially for people in vulnerability situation that is a problem for all the countries in Latin America. We have to pay attention this for these people and let us have the opportunity to mitigate the impacts and to adaptate their lives.
Thank you.
Yeah, make it easy. I agree with everything that my co-panelists have said, but I also want to add that besides all of the social and local challenges and risks that are associated with maybe more Latin American countries, the islands in particular face an even higher level of risk. They're at the front line of the climate change because it impacts their key economies, tourism, and from there, everything else, even the ability to live on the island, will be threatened with climate change. So the risk is very, very high. Essentially, what we've had, because each island is its own entity, its own country, its own political system, and every structure within there is independent of the next island 10 miles away, we need to work together much closer And particularly when it comes to COP27, because we're all competing for a meager, and our keynote speaker said it today, a meager amount of funds that they've made available, we really need to work together, collaborate, and go in there as a united body with one thing in mind. And don't get distracted with all of the other discussions. We need this funding to happen, and we must demand it because our lives depend on it.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all the panelists. So many important messages here throughout both of our panels and our opening keynote speaker. We're going to pretty much wrap up here. I want to thank you guys all for your participation. I think the urgency of the problem is very clear. The complexity of the solutions is also very clear, but the pieces are there, and it's great to hear what it is that people are working on, great to hear how the pieces are coming together. Clearly there's some mutual learning to do and a real learning curve that we're all on, but it's great to see all of this leadership. We want to just repeat the, of course, invitation from Dr. Mahmoud. Hope to see you all in Sharm el-Sheikh soon with these solutions, both working together and bringing further stories of implementation and progress. It's going to be a COP focused on action and implementation, as you mentioned, really taking that holistic approach to try to bring these pieces together. And hopefully we may see some of you along the way at the regional forum that we are hosting with ECLAC in Chile. So with that, thank you to all the panelists, and thank you to all who joined us here today. And we hope you have a fruitful rest of the day.
estos, déjame ponerlo, pasaron, voy a ponerlo aquí abajo. Por favor. Gracias. Thank you. Sí, muy buenos días. Podemos acercarnos un poquito más para adelante los que están atrás, por favor, para que podamos comenzar. Podemos pasar al podio el señor Alan Ramírez Risk, director técnico del Consejo Nacional para el Cambio Climático y Mecanismo de Desarrollo Limpio. El señor Daniel Galván, coordinador en el Centro Regional St. George de ONU de la Convención Internacional para el Cambio Climático, UNFCCC, por sus siglas en inglés. Y el señor Federico Grullón, encargado de transparencia, quien dará las palabras de cierre. Okay. El tema que trataremos brevemente es los asuntos relacionados a los mecanismos de desarrollo limpio y su transición al artículo 6, el futuro mecanismo que instalará la Convención para los temas de mercados de carbono. Comenzaremos con las palabras de apertura del señor Alan Ramírez, coordinador técnico del Consejo Nacional para el Cambio Climático y Mecanismo de Desarrollo Limpio.
Muy buenos días. Como ustedes comprenderán, se están desarrollando muchas actividades en el marco de esta Semana Regional del Clima Latinoamérica y Caribe. Unos 200 eventos están teniendo lugar simultáneamente y la mayoría, en muchos de ellos se me ha pedido intervención en palabras, por eso he tenido que improvisar en la mayoría de ellos, pero casi siempre cuando improviso se me va la mano y hablo de más, hablo más tiempo. Entonces hoy me dijeron que como tengo otro evento a continuación de este, que lo limitara en tiempo y bueno, esta vez sí tengo una presentación escrita, así que me disculpan por eso. En primer lugar, agradecemos la presencia de todos ustedes en el día de hoy, los que nos están siguiendo por el streaming y los que están aquí presentes en esta sala. En nombre del Consejo Nacional para el Cambio Climático y Mecanismo de Desarrollo Limpio, que a su vez es la autoridad nacional designada del Mecanismo de Desarrollo Limpio de la República Dominicana, les damos la más cordial bienvenida a este evento sobre orientación sobre la función del Mecanismo de Desarrollo Limpio. El Mecanismo de Desarrollo Limpio, MDL en español, CDM en inglés, ha recorrido un largo camino desde su adopción, su posterior entrada en vigor y sus dos subsecuentes periodos de implementación. Sin duda, merece reconocer la contribución de la lucha mundial contra el cambio climático que realiza el Mecanismo de Desarrollo Limpio, el cual, a la fecha del 31 de octubre del 2021, había sido responsable del registro de más de 7.849 actividades de proyectos y 356 programas de actividades, así como de la expedición de más de 2.170 millones de reducciones certificadas de emisiones, de las cuales más de 301 millones habían sido canceladas voluntariamente en los registros nacionales y en el registro del Mecanismo de Desarrollo Limpio. En el caso de la República Dominicana, nos constituimos en líderes regionales en la región del Caribe, al registrar 15 proyectos de mecanismo de desarrollo limpio, 14 de los cuales corresponden al sector privado y 1 al sector público, y que representan alrededor de 14 millones de toneladas anuales de reducción. 50% de esos proyectos se encuentran todavía en operación al día de hoy. Como es de su conocimiento, la Junta Ejecutiva del MDL ha tomado importantes decisiones sobre el funcionamiento del mecanismo más allá del final del segundo periodo de compromiso del Protocolo de Kioto, en la cual se encuentran que las solicitudes de registro, renovación del periodo de acreditación y expedición de reducciones certificadas de las emisiones de las actividades de proyectos, así como para los programas de las actividades que guarden relación con las reducciones de emisiones efectuadas después del 31 de diciembre de 2020, no podrán presentarse en el marco del mecanismo para un desarrollo limpio, pero podrán presentarse en el marco del mecanismo establecido en virtud del artículo 6, párrafo 4 del Acuerdo de París. También la Junta Ejecutiva ha pedido al órgano subsidiario de ejecución que estudie medidas para poner en práctica los aspectos relativos al registro del mecanismo de desarrollo limpio indicados en la decisión 3-CMA.3 y que formule recomendaciones para que la conferencia de las partes, en calidad de reunión de las partes en el protocolo de Kioto, las examine en su reunión 17 de sesiones a realizarse en noviembre del 2022. Estas decisiones acordadas en la COP26 de Glasgow implican impactos en los proyectos MDL existentes, a los sistemas de monitoreo, reporte y verificación, así como también a la implementación de las contribuciones nacionalmente determinadas. Es por esto que hemos organizado este evento, el cual tiene como principal objetivo proporcionar a los participantes de proyectos del MDL, a las autoridades nacionales operacionales designadas o los DOEs y a las autoridades nacionales del MDL o DNS de la región de Latinoamérica y el Caribe una descripción general de la orientación sobre el funcionamiento del mecanismo del MDL más allá del 31 de diciembre del 2020, fecha límite para las solicitudes de registro, renovación del periodo de acreditación y expedición de las reducciones certificadas de las emisiones para las actividades de proyectos, así como para los programas de actividades que guarden relación con las reducciones de emisiones. Finalmente, como co-chair y co-chair regional del Foro de las Autoridades Nacionales Designadas del Mecanismo de Desarrollo Limpio,